Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to IORadio with your host, Adam Smith. Today on our show, we have the author of the upcoming book, Crypto Confidential, an insider's account from the Frontlines of fraud, Mr. Jake Donoghue. Jake's going to be talking with us about his experience in the inner bowels of the crypto industry, what it's like to launch, promote, and deal with these crypto projects. He has a very interesting story, and his book chronicles his entire experience of getting into the crypto industry and eventually getting out. So let's hear what Jake has to say about this interesting experience. Welcome to the podcast. Great. It's Jake Donoghue. Am I pronouncing your name right?
That's right, yeah.
So why don't you give us a little bit of some background on who you are and where you're from and what you were doing before you got entangled into crypto. And as I understand it, you're writing this under a pseudonym. Jake Donoghue is not your real name, so you're going to be, I guess, limited in how much information you want to put out there about yourself because of liability or other concerns.
That's right. Yes. First of all, Adam, thanks so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you today. So yeah, exactly like you said, my name's Jake Donoghue. That is a pseudonym. Prior to working in crypto, I did a variety of things. So my career first started in finance, investment banking space. So I was working at a subsidiary of a large US investment bank and working in sales and trading. So FX and derivatives, sales and trading I was working on the prime brokerage. So we were kind of market making, providing liquidity and trade executions to kind of medium-sized hedge funds.
And you presumably have a degree and studied that. That was your area of expertise? No.
My degree is in the humanities. So it was a bit off-piste going into finance, but I pivoted out of finance, did that role for a while, and then went into kind of media, into media work, into PR, public relations, and did that for a while, for a kind of large PR agency, transatlantic PR agency. Where we were working with financial clients, so hedge funds, asset managers, private equity firms, that kind of stuff. That was our niche, and just getting them media coverage, improving and increasing their public image and that kind of stuff. Traditional PR, and then fell down the crypto rabbit hole just after the DeFi summer, so around the summer of 2020. Friends, contacts of mine were setting up their own crypto project and wanted me to come on board. They knew about what I was doing in PR. They knew that I was running the PR for some very big companies, very big financial companies, and getting them great exposure. So they wanted me to come on board as their chief communications officer for this project they were setting up. So that launched in what was it? Maybe it must have been like March, April, 2021. And I mean, as you'll know, back then things were really just, things were insane. You could launch anything onto the market and people would just snap it up. Everyone was really clamoring over themselves to get these token allocations in these altcoins, which were launching back then, and these so-called DeFi projects. So yeah, we launched the $3 million market cap, and on day one that went up 12,000%. So within about an hour of our token being publicly traded, we were over a $300 million market cap. And then what we had this valuation, this insanely high valuation, but actually, like with so many projects back then, we hadn't launched a platform or anything like that. Obviously, we wanted to just get the token out as quickly as possible. So and it was difficult to liquidate tokens as well, or kind of realize, that make some, realize gains of that valuation that we had, because that would have been terrible for the image, if we were seen to be kind of publicly dumping our own team or treasury tokens onto the market. So what we did was, we had this inbox full of people who saw how well our marketing had gone, who saw how well our token had performed on launch, and they were basically begging for our help to market their own tokens. So we spun up a marketing agency and registered that in the UK, and then started doing marketing, PR, communications, branding, that kind of stuff for other crypto projects and companies. And it was really when that happened that I really got in the thick of it in the industry. Within a few months, we were working with some of the biggest projects and companies in the space. So, real
Hmm.
household name projects and companies. And you got exposure, we got exposure to a lot of, their kind of inner workings, and, a lot of the ways that they were doing business. And, really that's when all the kind of malpractice and really, illicit kind of fraudulent stuff really kind of hit home and came to light. Because obviously, we were doing a lot of that with our
Right.
projects, but I mean, we were small compared to some of these projects we were working with. So, it was at that point that I really got a sense of just kind of how ubiquitous the fraud and the malpractice is within the crypto
So let me
industry.
ask you. So, what was your impression of crypto before you got involved in this? Did you have an opinion? Did you know much about it? Were you skeptical? Uh, how did your attitude of it change from before you got involved to when you first got involved? We kind of know what your attitude is now, but walk us through
Mm.
where you were on the outside when your friends pitched the idea of you coming on board. What did you think of crypto at that time?
Yeah, so I mean, I had some exposure to it. I mean, I'd say more exposure than most to it before kind of going into the industry full time. So back in kind of 2016, 2017, I was working for this for this bank, for the subsidiary of this bank, and they offered derivatives on a number of crypto assets. So back then there weren't too many tokens on the market. So we had Bitcoin, Ether, XRP. I think maybe Bitcoin Cash
Hmm.
as well. And yeah, my team was the team that actually launched the derivatives of those crypto assets. So it was the first time um, that this brokerage had ever offered trading execution on crypto assets. So I had some exposure to it. Obviously not to the same extent which I went on to have, but I guess I didn't. I felt quite neutral about it. At when I was at university, a lot of my friends were, kind of involved in, crypto trading, and they were making a lot. There was, that was around the kind of ICO era. So they were making a lot. So I knew that people were making quite a lot of money off this stuff. I didn't really have too much of an understanding of how the tech worked or kind of what was going
Right.
on. It kind of seemed like a bit like a pump
Hmm.
and dump, obviously, because I knew people who were kind of doing these ICOs, making a lot, and then in a couple of days just kind of abandoning the efforts that they had put
Right.
into it prior to that. So it seemed a bit sketchy. And obviously, there were just the kind of, the rumors around, people using it to buy drugs online or to, you hear stories in the news occasionally about ransomware attacks, people, demanding payment in Bitcoin, that kind of stuff. So I had like a somewhat skeptical, impression of it. But then again, it wasn't really on my radar, not
But
until,
you saw a lot of people making
yeah,
money
not
at it, so you knew there must have been something there, right? And that's kind of
Well, this is the thing. I mean, so I knew a lot of people who were holding Bitcoin going into the kind of 2016, 2017 pump, around that time. And then they made a lot of money. I know one guy who he bought a house with the Bitcoin that he was holding, and he was, I think, about 20 or so at the time. But then it all crashed, and then Bitcoin went down to what,
mhm,
3K, up from 17 down to 3K. So it crashed. So a lot of people made money, but then a lot of people also lost money. I know a
right.
lot of people who
I
bought at the
mean,
top.
mathematically speaking, that's the
Um,
model, right? Anybody who makes
yeah,
money takes it from somebody else who buys in. So people that are holding think that they're up when they see the price, but until you actually liquidate, you don't really know. So your book
exactly.
chronicles this whole process of you getting involved in the crypto industry until it basically things kind of flame out. Um, can you share with us what the elevator pitch was for the crypto company your friend started that you later got involved with?
Yeah, for sure. So it was essentially, we weren't allowed to describe it in these terms, for reasons which are explained in the book, and which we can go into on this, in this chat. But yeah, it was essentially a gambling platform. It was what's called like a prediction market. So you'd be able to kind of predict the future price of crypto assets, and then if you were accurate, if you were within a certain range of accuracy, you'd receive a reward. The whole kind of hook for this platform, what made it different to other prediction market platforms out there, like Augur or whatever, some of the more well-known ones, or just from trading platform, was that you supposedly you wouldn't lose your stake if you got your prediction
All
wrong.
right. I read that and I was
So you
laughing.
could,
So correct me if I'm wrong. The
yeah.
model here is you've set up this company and you take people's money and they speculate on what the price of Bitcoin is going to be, and if they get it right, they get a bonus. If they get it wrong, they don't lose any money. And presumably the rationale for this is behind the scenes, this liquidity that people are keeping on file with you guys, y'all are playing with it, trying to make money, make additional value off of it, right? That was the premise?
Well, no, so we
Or
weren't,
you didn't even
well,
get that far ahead
yeah, it's quite,
to decide if it was going to be solvent or not?
well, it's tricky. So we weren't positioning it as so for example, we weren't really like investing or speculating or whatever with the liquidity that we were holding. Now that did actually go on to happen. When these yield
Well, then
farming
how does it
when
work
yield
if
farming started
people
going
can
up.
bet and then they only win but they
Yeah.
don't lose? How does that work then?
Well,
If you're pitching that
I
to
mean
me,
that's the
I got to
question.
go, well, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what I said when I heard it, and I said to the guy, I said to the guy who was pitching me this idea. I was like, "That sounds too good to be true." And he was like, "It's the only, only in crypto, only in Web3, do things which sound too good to be true actually end up being true." Now, obviously, it ended up not being true because, as the book goes on to
Uh-huh.
detail,
So it
things
really
went
was
horribly
just
wrong.
as
But
shallow as
essentially,
that. It was like, yeah, it's a casino where you don't lose. And they just
yeah.
bought
I mean,
into it.
and then
Okay.
there was a
I've
kind
learned
of
to not
there
question
was some.
the irrationality of things when it comes to crypto because it's futile. Uh,
There was some justification that we used. So essentially, what it was that when you put these tokens that we had launched, and you could only speculate on the prices within the native currency of the
which
platform.
you called
So when you put these
tent
tokens,
tokens.
yeah,
Now that's
exactly.
a
So
fake. That's a fake name. That the real tokens were something else. Okay.
yeah, exactly. I had to change. I say this in the start of the book, so some of the names and details and that kind of stuff have been changed, because the book presents just a lot of quite
Right.
shocking revelations which weren't previously in the
Mhm.
public domain. So yeah, tent and the protocol was in the book. It's called Portent Protocol, and the token is called Tent. But actually, yeah, in reality, it was a different
Gotcha.
name.
So early on, once you and your friend had this crypto company formed, you stated you were working 100 hours a week. I'm curious what you
Oh
would be
yeah.
doing 100 hours per week for the company.
Well, different things. So yeah, I mean, 100 hours a week was easy. There were weeks when we were working 120 hours a week, where we'd wake up, so we'd wake up at 9 a.m. and then you'd be going until 3 in the morning, sleep for a few hours, and non-stop. So that
But
was
what
a
are you
regular
doing? Are you
occurrence.
just on social media? Are you just astroturfing? Or making phone calls, trying to get coverage in the press? What exactly is that involve?
Well, so anything. So for example, I mean, it kind of really reached its peak when
I
we
mean, are
were
you
running
making
this
little
project, and also we
meme
had.
things of frogs and things like that? I mean, are you making like videos of like Hitler talking about crypto? I mean, I know that there's a ton of time you can spend doing this. I'm just curious, how does that manifest?
Yeah, so we weren't we had we hired people for the memes and that kind of
But that
stuff.
was actually part of the budget,
But
right?
yeah,
You
I
got to
mean,
create memes, and you got to do this and that, huh?
oh yeah, we had a chief meme officer. Yeah.
Serious business.
Well, exactly.
So you're getting ready to launch this project. You enlist the services of an auditor called Tudis Security, I guess, which is another fake name. I'm curious what kind of
Yeah.
services such a company does, and does it in any way actually resemble the services most of us would consider to be auditing by a standard accounting firm? You write in your book,
Yeah.
you hired this auditor to verify the integrity of your business, and they say
Mm,
instead of taking regular payment, they will work for tokens. But
yeah.
before you answer that, I want to inject one of my recurring observations about people in the crypto industry. They use words like liquidity, audit, secure, vetted, backed, etc. But it ultimately seems they have their
Yeah.
own definitions for what these terms are that are dramatically different from the traditional definition. Is this another case of some shady firm that is ultimately a PR company pretending they're an auditor?
Yeah, I mean, so Adam, I mean that's exactly it. So that is one of the more shocking things, and that takes place quite early in the book. This the stuff of the auditors. What they're basically meant to do is they're meant to look through a project's code. They're supposed to audit the code of the smart contracts or the code that of the token or
Right.
whatever, and make sure that there are no bugs or anything like that. Now, yeah, as it says in the book, so leaking some content here, there are just huge conflicts of interest with these guys. So the auditor who was meant to who was meant to audit our token and our platform and all that kind of stuff, they received a pre-sale allocation. So part of their payment from us was in a pre-sale allocation in our in our token. Now that is just when I heard that that was unfathomable. Because then if they're incentivized for
Right.
this token to just take off on launch, then what's to stop them just kind of rubber stamping the code or whatever, not really checking through it, or if they see a bug, not flagging it, or this kind of stuff. So because that would then create like a negative sentiment around the around the project if they did uncover bugs in the code or whatever. And they put out their reports supposedly independently as well. So they look through the code and then they publish a report and that goes out on their websites
Right.
and socials and whatever. And it's supposed to be completely independent of the actual team. Now, if they've got an alignment and an incentivization for the project to do well, that just completely undermines their service. It would be like to KPMG coming in to audit the books of a publicly traded
Right. And they
company and
decide they're going
then
to get paid
receiving
in like
payment.
burritos or something that the company makes or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or paid in the company's stock. It's an
I
unfathomable
assume that there's
conflict of
some
interest.
ethical or even legal criminal regulations that prohibit this from being done in the traditional finance world. Is this just another case of where crypto
Oh
people
yeah.
think, it's different, so our rules don't apply to us or something like that?
Well, this is the thing. The whole legality of crypto is just fascinating. It kind of exists. The whole thing kind of exists in a legal gray area.
But is it really a legal
And I mean,
gray
it
area,
basically,
or do they just argue it's a gray area? Because there's a big hoopla about crypto wanting regulatory clarity from the SEC, and the
right.
SEC says no, 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 no. We're following the same rules that we put it in like 1933 or whenever.
Yeah.
And the internet wasn't around back then. There wasn't a bunch of stuff. Fraud is fraud. It doesn't matter whether you're using digital tokens or you're using something else. We have clarity, but the crypto people just wanted to pretend that they were different and they shouldn't have to follow the standard rules.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're completely right. It is very tricky. I mean, so a lot of these companies, right, aren't registered in the US or in the UK or in places where there is, there are kind of regulatory bodies and, that kind of stuff, and there are, trading standards and everything like that. So, for example, our company was registered in various
Like,
places,
uh
Cayman Islands, Seychelles, BVI, Panama. We set up these kind of shell entities all over the place. And that's the case with a lot of these companies. So I talk about this actually towards the end of the book. We were working with an exchange registered in one of those kind of like offshore domiciles like Seychelles or whatever. So they were registered there. They were operating in an office in London. Was their their kind of head office, their headquarters. And the user base was mainly people in like Turkey and like Eastern Europe and stuff. So, I mean, who's regulating that? I mean, are they regulated under the Seychelles
right.
law, or are they regulated under UK law, or the law of where their customers are based? So it's really, really tricky. And I mean, these kind of offshore domiciles as well, that their judicial system, their regulatory systems are, let's just say, less than robust. And I mean, I discuss this in the book. The lawyers, the law firms in some of these places, they're all in on it as
hmm
well. The law firms that we hired, yeah, you have to get like legal opinions. So crypto in a place, I don't know, wherever, like Cayman Islands or wherever, is not really regulated. But things like gambling are. So, you have to get legal opinions to say that you're not a gambling
Right. You
company,
talk
that you're
about that in
not,
the book, how
registered.
you had to kind of just change some of the wording to get around some of these things.
Yeah, Exactly, but also these legal opinions are all up for sale. These law companies want crypto firms to be buying their opinion, and what you get is a real race to the bottom. Because what we were doing, and what people do is they kind of pit law firms against each other, so that one law firm will say, "Okay, I'll give you this opinion for $15,000." Then you go down the road to their competitor, and the competitor says, "Okay, great, I'll do it for 12,000." Then you go to the next one, and he says, "Okay, I'll do it for 10,000."
And this opinion, let
Now
me
I had legal
clarify
opinions
that.
being sold for
This
5,000.
opinion is something that goes on record when you're applying to operate in a particular jurisdiction that says, "Hey, we've enlisted a third party that confirms that we are not in conflict with any of your laws," right?
That's
But
exactly it. So say, for
depending
example,
upon how
if
much you pay, you can get these firms to basically say whatever you want them to say.
to say whatever the hell you want them to say, yeah. So say for example, if you're running a kind of crypto betting platform, and then you get a legal opinion from a law firm that says you're not a gambling platform and you don't follow the gambling law. If the gambling regulator in the Seychelles or wherever decides to sue you, that legal opinion basically makes you bulletproof to them. It puts the liability on the law firm rather than on you. So the regulator will actually be suing the law firm, and these law firms don't care if they get sued because they all have like just the best insurance policies.
Or I guess they just
So
shut down and
actually,
reopen under another name, a month later or something like that, huh?
I haven't heard of that happening. Because a lot of these people, a lot of these law firms, they're very, very
Hmm.
well known. And they want that, to build up that reputation. So there probably are some like really shady ones which set up a new law firm every week or so. But we went with, some of the
Hmm.
bigger ones, who've been around for a very, very long time. But they don't care about getting sued because they have insurance protecting them. They have indemnity cover,
Right.
tens of million, worth tens
So
of
let me
millions.
ask you, when
So
when you were doing this, what were you paid when you joined the organization, and how did this change over time? What was your remuneration?
yeah, that's a
Because I
great
don't think you put
question.
that in the book, right?
No, no, no. I didn't. I mean, it really varied. Um, so yeah, I mean, we had various companies set up, and we were, on the payroll for each of these companies. So we had multiple salaries coming in, but also, we were involved in the crypto. We were trading, we were taking pre-sale allocations in projects, all this kind of stuff. We were, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, flipping NFTs and that kind of stuff. So it really depends. I think probably the most I made but then again, I wasn't as involved in the whole kind of
Well,
trading and that kind of
presumably,
stuff
though, for them to
as other
entice
people
you to
were.
come on board with them full time, you need a certain minimum
Yeah.
amount to cover your expenses. You have to get paid in real money, I assume, unless you're living in, Sam
Yeah.
Bankman-Fried's little enclave or something like that, where everything's paid for. But I assume
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you know, was there some money thrown at you initially that put you over the hump?
Yeah, yeah. I
All
mean,
right, how much?
without
I want
wanting
to
to
know
kind of
how
go
much.
into this specific, a lot, a lot. I mean, I was young when we
you're
started
not gonna
when
you're
we
not gonna be
started this stuff, and it
specific, huh?
was it was more than I had ever seen. I mean, yeah,
It was enough to
tens of
make you
thousands
kind of slide
as a
your
signing
ethics a little
bonus.
bit off into the shadows. Is what you're saying? That much money.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than I'd ever seen. And it just kind of kept getting more and more as we got, further involved in crypto. So I mean, yeah, just for example, the signing bonus, when I first came on, that was in itself was tens of thousands, and then it just kind of escalated from there. And every month it was more. So I mean, yeah, it was a lot of there was a lot of
So
cash.
did the people in your organization, did you live that luxury lifestyle?
Um, yes, it's a good question. We weren't that flash. A lot of the people around us, were very much like that.
So
I mean, I
nobody
guess
had a
that's the
Lambo or
start,
anything,
because
huh?
we knew a lot of people who had Lambos. And yeah, a lot of people living that whole kind of moon boy fantasy. I mean, for example, like all the co-founders who I set up with, they all bought their own houses and that kind of stuff very early on with the money that they made from crypto and all of that kind of stuff. But we weren't going around with I mean, I at least wasn't going around with the kind of Patek Philippe on the wrist and that kind of. I found that kind of stuff a bit tacky. But I mean, yeah, we were living well and still are. But I mean, I guess we were really trying to or at least maybe trying to convince ourselves that we were a kind of legit operation, that we were businessmen as opposed to just these crypto influencers whoever who live these kind of
Hmm.
fantasy lives and that kind of stuff. So we just kind of had our heads down and we're working. And it's difficult to live too lavish a lifestyle when you are working 100, 120 hours a week. But yeah, I mean, none of us were broke,
Gotcha.
to put it like
So
that.
when you were promoting your scheme, you talked about how you'd offer money to crypto journalists who would write stories for you. You even mentioned some
Yeah.
names like Blockchain Gazette. I don't know if that's a real publication or not.
No, no, it's not.
Were there any that wouldn't take payola?
Um, yeah, there were some, but I mean that was really kind of, we were really pushing it there. We were going to like, the real mainstream. We were going to like journalists at like the
Right.
mainstream media
But
and
in the
trying to get
crypto
them to
industry, they
write.
pretty much all would take money and write articles for you.
Um, yeah, all of them would take money, but some of them were less bad than others. So all of them would, but I get some of them would take money in the kind of traditional way that media companies take money from companies looking to promote themselves. But and so they'd write sponsored content, and some of them would insist on a sponsored
Hmm.
tag on the article or
Right.
something, some kind of disclaimer. But I mean, that was maybe one or two outlets, crypto outlets, who would actually rigorously enforce that. Most of them not, and actually some of them were so brazen that in their kind of pitch decks and stuff, it would say price for a sponsored article $10,000, price for a sponsored article without the sponsored tag $15,000. So they were advertising the fact that they would willfully remove the advertising tags from their articles for additional
Hmm.
payment. So yeah, the crypto media is a very very and needless to say, the kind of the spammier or the lower quality the outlet is, then the more kind of corrupt they are, and the more that
Hmm.
they'll do. So some of them, for example, would actually quality control the article. So even if they weren't running it as a sponsored piece with a disclaimer, they would quality control the content of that piece. And if say you were advertising like a yield farming protocol, and you put in the head, you wanted the headline to be 1,000,000% APY guaranteed. Some articles would remove that or change that or edit that in some kind of way. Um, Even though they were taking payment for
Hmm.
the article. But yeah, like I said, some of the lower quality media outlets in the space didn't care. They didn't even read it. You'd pay them, you'd send them the article, and then they would just click
Right.
publish, not caring about what was in
So
it.
in the book, you talk of a group of people called shillers, who we might
Yeah,
more colloquially know as astroturfers, which I guess are paid armies of
yeah.
people that would promote whatever narrative you want in social media. Can you elaborate more on this network? How did you find and hire them? How much did it cost? How big was this army? Are we talking about using bots, etc.?
Yeah, so there were a lot of different ways to go about that kind of stuff with the Shillers. So we didn't have anyone on our team kind of doing that. We weren't, because that stuff is really low value work. And it's always a bit dubious how much of an impact it is. In a lot of cases, it's actually a net negative to be doing that stuff. If a project is seen to be, astroturfing or whatever, it's actually worse for their reputation and for their exposure. But of course, especially early on, that wasn't the case, and everyone was doing it. So we outsourced a lot of that. So there are kind of specialist agencies based in places like the Philippines, or Eastern Europe or whatever, who they do it, and they do it for incredibly cheap. And they have, yeah, just kind of armies of people sitting in rooms, just kind of posting this stuff, and they'll post 10,000 Twitter posts a day about a project or whatever. And it is really just a huge waste of everything, just of human potential, of energy, of people talk about the wasted energy that goes into Bitcoin mining, or any kind of proof of work consensus mechanism. But people, the underspoken about waste of energy is the human waste. The waste of energy that goes into just promoting stuff which is fundamentally valueless. And people just kind of sitting in a room posting memes, just doing really soul destroying work. And obviously, you can argue that it gives people in kind of developing countries like a job or whatever, but it's fundamentally unproductive. That time and that effort could be spent doing something else. So I always found that side of things a bit depressing to work on. But yeah, essentially, we offer that
So you're
those
saying
services to
that
clients. Yeah.
maybe probably one of the more beneficial elements of your ability to create value or to get interest wasn't so much just trolling the internet proper or social media trying to create a buzz. I understand you guys would have these lists of people that
Mm.
just were actively looking to get in on the ground floor of these projects, right? And would you say that was your main source of liquidity when you would launch these things? You have these private mailing lists of people?
Well, we did a lot of services. So yeah, I mean, that was one of these things that we occasionally did sometimes when, we helped, people with fundraising. So we'd connect them with, with VCs or whoever, angel investors who wanted to invest in their project. And that was a big source of, revenue for us. Especially because it was so easy, that it was really no work, and we would take a percentage of the fundraise, that kind of stuff. So we were kind of acting as sort of like outsourced placement agents. But that was just one of the things that we did. We really did everything. Any kind of marketing service, we could do advertising. We would put billboards up in Times Square. We'd run out of home campaigns and that kind of stuff. Through to digital marketing, performance marketing, whatever. We'd run kind of Google ads and that kind of stuff for projects. We do obviously all the media PR. We do influencer marketing. We do branding and design. So, we create brands for, like projects which are just starting up at the very start of their life cycle and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, we basically just did whatever these guys needed us to do. So, some of the legit stuff, and then some of the, what we at the time called the dark arts, marketing, promotion, that kind of stuff. Influencer marketing was a huge thing for us.
Right.
It was something that we invested a lot of time and effort into, really building out that business line, just because there was so much money in it. And by the end, we were doing like celebrity marketing, so we could basically just get anyone. No one was out of reach. I mean, by then, we were speaking to like footballers, and like international sports people, real kind of household name like
Right.
celebrities, about becoming, what was called brand ambassadors for crypto companies. And some of the exchanges and stuff that we worked with, we were really interested in that. So yeah, influence and celebrity marketing was a
I
big
gotcha.
big spinner for us. And, we worked with some people who then, they got sued for the promotions they did, high profile lawsuits and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was really something that really differentiated us. Just that influencer celebrity stuff.
So this book is like one part frightening, one part hilarious. It runs like some kind of comedy in many parts. You have high level VCs who have put six figures into the scheme, who later don't realize how it works and complain about transaction taxes, admitting they didn't even read the white paper. Everybody involved in the
Yeah.
project openly talks about the various ways in which fraud will be perpetrated, as if it's as mundane as ordering coffee at Starbucks. Did everybody
Yeah.
basically feel like this, quote, new market was insulated from all the traditional systems of criminal justice? Can you identify, for example, the different archetypes of sociopaths you encountered? I assume they all were blinded by greed, but they all
Yeah.
surely couldn't have shared a similar level of comfort regarding what they were doing. Was there anybody here who had any measurable level of long-term self-awareness beyond their innate greed?
No, I mean, I disagree with that point. They all very much were absolutely comfortable.
So,
They were all completely aware and completely everyone I encountered, every founder, every lawyers, the in-house lawyers that were working for these projects, they all knew what was going on. They were either doing it themselves, they were adjacent to it. People used to, especially in kind of 2021, that kind of time, we were all saying to ourselves, this is the last fully unregulated bull run. Let's just go for people. They loved that, and everybody was aware of, the malpractice and that kind of stuff that was going on, and yeah, everyone was happy with it.
and so there was never
Everyone
any
who
voice
wanted
of
it to.
reasons showing up in any kind of meetings or anything like, "Hey, this is illegal," or like that was just kind of always known. We don't talk about that.
Yeah, no, I don't think I ever um, heard someone say, "Oh shit, maybe we shouldn't be doing this." I mean, the insider trading that was going on was mental. Like, there'd be 50 people in a Telegram group, all the, project founders, influencers, whoever. And then it's okay, we're going to put this big news announcement out. The market makers would be in the Telegram group as well and be like, okay, be on standby. So when they put this announcement out, they get all the influencers to shill it. They do all of this stuff, and then they'd say to the market maker, "Okay, now like go and do your thing." And the market maker would be there with like a big pool of treasury tokens, team tokens, and then they just start
Hmm.
liquidating those, selling those into the pumps, extracting the liquidity that this shilling would attract for them. So, and yeah, these were regular occurrences. This was every day. This stuff was happening.
So throughout the book, you outline numerous egregious conflicts of interest, such as your incubator running their own trading platform. You've got people
Oh
in
yeah.
charge of doing PR and marketing, also operating financial transactions. Now you note that this is clearly illegal in traditional finance, but you routinely refer to crypto as the Wild West. And maybe you answered this already, but
Yeah.
did everybody honestly think they weren't subject to existing laws just because they were messing with digital tokens?
Well, this is the thing. So everyone was comfortable with actually doing the stuff, doing the fraud, doing the market manipulation, whatever. Everybody was comfortable with it and wanted to do it. People were aware that there could potentially be repercussions further down the line. So yeah, there was a big emphasis on law, and compliance. It was supposed like compliance. I mean, like, okay, make sure we get this squared away with compliance or whatever, or let's make sure that we get like a rubber stamp from a lawyer before we do this kind of stuff or whatever. So people were aware that it was potentially risky, even though it was well, like most people thought it was like fully unregulated
Hmm.
then. They were aware of repercussions down the line. Especially this was especially the case kind of later on, throughout my time there, when the lawsuits started happening for some of these undisclosed promoters or
Right.
whoever. So people knew that the stuff that they did in the past could actually come back and bite them, and that was a kind of gradual awareness, which kind of caught on. And the way people got around that was by covering their tracks. People would be like, "You need to go back and just delete everything." People were deleting social media posts. They were taking down websites, taking down articles, anything that could, potentially tie them back to something dodgy. People were very quick to clear their tracks. And actually, there was even a certain awareness of this as we were going along. So people would say, okay, let's make sure that, we've got the kind of auto remove feature on these messages going, on Telegram or on WhatsApp. So let's make sure that we're like, wiping our messages and that kind of stuff. So yeah, even as we're going on, people were aware that they needed to cover their tracks, and then that really, became apparent later on when a lot of projects started shutting down. When the market got really bad after Luna and FTX, that was actually great for a lot of people because it gave them an opportunity to just
Hmm.
run off. People who were planning exits for a long time, that was perfect for them. They could be like, okay, great, now we can just blame our exit on market conditions, and no one's going to care because all the noise and all the attention is on Luna and FTX. No one's going to care if little portent
Right.
protocol runs off into the night. So yeah, then yeah, just shut up shop and leave, and then just do it again this cycle.
So uh, basically, what you're saying is when FTX imploded and we saw what a complete shambles and how gratuitous their executives were in just committing fraud without a second thought, even naming their chat rooms in recognition of the crimes that they're doing. Um, this is par for the course. This was not an anomaly, right? This is like what FTX is doing is what you guys were doing. And is that your observation? Like everybody in the industry, Sam Bankman-Fried's mismanagement of FTX is not an anomaly, right? This is more the rule, right?
Oh, Adam, as in, yeah. So it's even worse than that. And everyone knew about FTX. At least they knew, at least maybe they didn't have the full picture. So I mean, even some of the stuff that they got found out doing, even I was surprised that being so over leveraged on Luna and Alameda, some of the trades they were making, that kind of stuff. I was shocked by that, but everyone knew that there was bad shit going on at FTX. It was an open secret in the industry. I mean, people know this now, but I would tell people, but I would speak to kind of outsiders at the time about what was, and they couldn't believe it. They didn't. A lot of people hadn't really even heard of Alameda, kind of before the collapse. But I tell people that the biggest market maker, so the only market maker on FTX, is it operating in the same building as FTX itself, even though they're meant to be separate entities. They're operating in the same building in the Bahamas. The CEO of that market maker is Sam Bankman-Fried's
Right.
ex-girlfriend. They all live together in this, in the same apartment in the Albany. Of course, there's a conflict of interest, so everyone knew that there was this stuff going on. Um, so a lot of people really weren't surprised when it all
Right.
came
Did
out.
you
And
ever
I
meet
mean,
Sam?
it was the same at I never met Sam. No, no, no. I met other people who worked at FTX, but
How
I never
about
met Sam.
Caroline?
No. No, 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 never met. Never can't say I did, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, founders of other people who at least not now because I mean he's more well known than anyone, but at the time people who were similarly as well known as him, running other exchanges and other companies. I met them, and yeah, this stuff it's really going on. It's going on
Hmm.
everywhere at every exchange. Like the wash trading. I mean, I speak about this in the book as well, I think. When we launched our token, obviously on the day of launch, we had really high volumes and there's a lot of interest, a lot of trading activity, and that was great. But then that just completely
Right.
went flat very quickly afterwards. No one was trading this
Well,
shit.
let's talk about that.
Um,
So, so when you launched the token for your initial project that you got involved
yeah,
in, you have to deal with
yeah,
a bot, according to the book. You're dealing with a bot that dumps 300K worth of ETH into pumping the token from
yeah,
30 cents to $3. So you had
yeah.
somebody who was kind of trying to game your game before you even launched. So you
Oh yeah,
freeze
yeah,
that
yeah.
account, and then at that time you have 300,000 worth of liquidity in the pool. Then you start taking
Hmm.
orders. From that point, you all brag that your market cap is 90 million. Now, my question is,
Hmm.
why the hell would you guys be talking about market cap when you know exactly how much liquidity is in the pool? You know there's not 90 million there. You know how much you can cash out before it goes completely to zero, and it's probably significantly less than 90 million. This doesn't really seem to make sense since everybody since day one knew they had to be cautious about liquidating tokens to get their money out of the scheme. So why wasn't there more discussion about realistically how much liquidity is actually available?
Yeah, you're right. This is a great point as well. And again, this is yeah, something of it's like a kind of optics
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? Because and it's exactly what I was alluding to earlier as well. Difficult to realize these these market caps and all these kind of project valuations. Again, they're all completely made up. We had a fully diluted market cap of what and it kind of discusses it going up and up and up in the book. The thing is, there wasn't that liquidity on the exchanges that it was trading on. A lot of those tokens were locked. A lot of them were treasury tokens or had been sold to VCs and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, but I mean, even then, there was still, on that first day, at least anyway, before people started extracting the liquidity, the insiders started dumping and that kind of stuff, there was still a lot. There was still, millions of liquidity that people had put into, Uniswap and the other exchanges that it was trading on. But yeah, the fully diluted valuation fully diluted market cap isn't a good, really an accurate measure of describing
Is there an
the
accurate
project
way? Is there an
because
accurate way to say here's how much actual real money has been spent on token X? We know, like, if you're running
um
an exchange, you have that information.
hmm,
If you're using a
yeah
DEX, a decentralized exchange, is there a way of finding that
hmm.
information out on the DEX?
Of what, sorry, seeing how much liquidity is in the
Right. Well,
pool.
like you ran,
Yeah, you can see
you
that, yeah.
ran this, but there's no talk about that, right? It doesn't, I don't understand how anybody who really cares about money and is holding these tokens, that's not a metric that they're not paying attention to. Now, I know with Bitcoin, it's so spread out, it's very hard to tell how much actual liquidity. And because the trading is also concentrated on these private exchanges like Coinbase and Binance, and nobody really knows how much liquidity they have. But
Yeah.
in the other exchanges that might be completely automated, isn't that a metric that
Hmm.
should be out there that people should be paying attention to?
Well, you can see how much liquid. Sorry, one sec. Sorry, you can see how much liquidity is on a DEX. You go on DEX tools and it shows you how much how much ETH or whatever, or it's such as ETH, and then
Did you
just
just
do that
nobody just care?
as well.
Nobody care about that? They're saying, oh, it's 90
No, no,
million
they
market cap, but there's only $300,000 in liquidity in there.
No, no, they absolutely do care about that. And all those kind of metrics. Now people do watch them. So like I said, on the day of launch, those metrics for us were looking great. So we had a lot of liquidity that people had put in. Obviously, that eventually got all extracted over time and stuff. And we had for example, high trading volumes. And again, Dex tool shows you the trading volume on Uniswap or whatever kind of Dex we're trading on. Now our trading volume after started just flatlining, right? We went from several million USD in volume on the first day, which obviously those figures look great. It's really entices people to get in, which kind of gives an impression it's a healthy market, down to several $100 of volume in a day. Now that's no one wants to trade a market like that. No one wants to trade a market without any liquidity, without any activity. So we spoke to the exchange that we were listed on. We were like, how can we get the volumes up? Is there some kind of like promotion or whatever that we can run, which will get people trading? And they were like, no, guys, don't worry. We'll just turn the volume bot on.
Yes.
They flipped the switch, they pushed the button, and then 2 seconds later, we had 20 million, 30 million in volume a day. And that's reflected on these data
Right. So this is on a
aggregators.
private exchange
Um,
where nobody really knows what's going on behind the scenes, I take it.
No, exactly. But so this is happening on a private exchange, but then because they have their API, they have their data feed being plugged into CoinMarketCap, CoinGecko,
Mhm.
whatever. It even on these kind of sources of truth,
Right. It all just kind of
these
propagates out to all
impartial.
the other media. Hmm.
Exactly. It looked like if you went on CoinMarketCap, it would say we had a $10 million trading volume per day when that was just complete. It was completely made up. It was washed. And yeah, again, like market makers, they could spoof the order books as well. So again, to entice people to trade. So on a centralized
Hmm.
exchange, they would just fill the order book with with fake orders, and then they would get cancelled at the last minute. So people would think that there's more kind of supply and demand at different price levels, and than there actually is. And yeah, or the market makers would also, they'd also wash the volumes as well as the exchanges. So on the dexes, you have market makers operating on dexes as well, getting the volume up. So they're making and taking
Hmm.
liquidity as well. So yeah, it's all rigged basically, and it's all to kind of entice people in to trade these tokens, or to
Right.
show people that it's healthy, the market's
So
healthy.
in your book,
Um,
you cover the creation of this tent token and a venture associated with it that's centered around speculating on the price of Bitcoin. After the launch, and this may be, I have to, pardon me, when I got your manuscript, I printed it out and I kind of carried it around with me as I was reading it over the course of a week and a half.
no
There was
worries.
no page numbers. At some point, I dropped it, and I don't know if I got everything in order, so I might have missed a part in the book. But I did, as far as I know, I read the
No
whole
worries.
thing. Um, but the
Okay.
book goes into you and your, so you've created this venture, and then at some point
Mhm.
you just pivot into creating an entity called Moonshot that helps other crypto companies with their projects. I don't recall reading how your original project wound down, except at the very end when you just kind of said it went nowhere or something. What happened to Tent and the other elements of that venture? Did you just abandon it when you had another opportunity to start doing work for other companies? Did you dump all the tokens? Did I miss something?
Yeah. Um, yeah, well, no, exactly. So you're right. Yeah. So the book is kind of split into three parts. So the first third of the book, part one, is all about Tent, Quantum Protocol, taking that to market. And then it kind of ends with the launch, and everything that
And
went
then you
wrong
just
around
pivot
that.
to, hey, we're going to do this for
Um,
other companies.
Exactly, and then we set up Moonshot Advisory, the marketing agency, and we started working with our companies. Now, Tent is ticking along
Uh
in the
huh.
background while
I
this is
gotcha.
happening. So Tent's still going, but it's kind of slowly
I
bleeding out.
gotcha.
Every now, but our focus was mainly on this marketing agency from that point onwards. But Tent was always it's in the
I
background and
gotcha.
it gets referenced, tangentially,
But all those
time and
promises,
again.
this betting market never materialized, right? You never even put that out there.
Oh no no oh yeah yeah no no we
Oh,
put that
okay.
out there. We launched the MVP.
Oh, interesting.
The platform went
Okay.
out and it's yeah, it had a couple of people using it to begin with, and then like most so-called D apps, like decentralized applications, I mean there was no uptake on it. And I talk about this later in the book as well. So actually we started setting up another project as well. We started yeah, fundraising for another project. So we were going to do that as well as kind of keeping things ticking with Portent and with the marketing agency. But then yeah, for reasons various which are discussed kind of in the back third of the book, that had to get shut down as well. And then yeah, it's also discussed in the kind of back third of the book that this problem of users to getting people to use these platforms wasn't by any means exclusive to us. It's the whole of so-called DeFi. No one's
Right.
using this stuff, and a lot of projects, and especially kind of like the L1s and that kind of stuff, they have huge grants, funds to get the apps onto their chain because they think they'll that'll bring the users, and if that's not the case, then again a lot of these projects will kind of spoof or fabricate the usership stats, or networks will kind of make transfer transactions between themselves, or they'll have their market makers will do it, or they'll automate it for a script where people are just kind of wallets are just transacting with one another. So it looks like the number of transactions on a network is actually higher than it is because there's very few users
Right.
for DeFi and for decentralized applications. And that was the same with us as well. So yeah, I mean, a couple of people used it
So
maybe
so one of the
when we
takeaways, I
launched it.
guess, is the 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 general model of, and this is would be my impression, which your book confirmed, is the money to be made in almost every facet of the crypto industry is this initial launch, is the excitement over this thing possibly exploding, a big pump, and then some people who get in early can dump and make a lot of money. There's less emphasis on whether or not there's an MVP, a minimum viable product, whether the apps are even not only not only are they useful, do they have users, but do they even exist, right?
Mm.
It's like all the energy is
Oh
put
yeah.
on the first 10% of the project of just making people aware of it and creating a framework where you can collect their money. And then the other 90% is like, oh, yeah, we'll get around to that. And then this explains why you guys kind of pivoted. You got that 10%, you pivoted over and did somebody else's 10%, and then somebody else's 10%, because that's really where all the money
Yeah.
is, right? Because at the end of the day, nobody can point to a single crypto project and go, wow, they're doing something everybody wants to use, right?
Yeah, I mean, Adam, that you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, that's completely spot on. All the money was in these launches, and that's why what's kind of happening now in this cycle is so fascinating, really, because all these projects last cycle was, then you discussed this brilliantly in your documentary, this concept of innovation. Is it actually
Mm-hmm.
innovation? Back in the last cycle, word, I got sick of that word, innovation, or this is an innovative project and this is an innovative product, and we're going to really disrupt this, that, and the other. Projects were making all of these grandiose claims, really emphasizing that the serious technical underpinnings of their projects. And then none of this stuff
Uh-huh.
materialized, or it was a disappointment, or it got rug pulled, or whatever. One thing or another went wrong. All of this kind of culminated. The apogee of this was with the collapse of obviously Luna and FTX. Luna supposedly this the new monetary system that was being made, and Do Kwon would make just the most outrageous
Right.
claims, and obviously that's what people loved him. And same with FTX, like a legitimate business. Now that narrative is fully out the window now. No one in the cycle is really talking about the tech or anything like that. And when you get rid of that narrative, and when that narrative around technical innovation gets exposed as being false, which it has done, what are you left with? You're left with the meme. You're left with pure
Right.
speculation. That's why in this cycle, the only thing that's kicking off is meme coins. projects which proudly proclaim on their, if they even have a website, we have no roadmap. There is no roadmap. This is a joke. And these things, some of these meme coins are, at tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think Brett actually just reached 1 billion, if I'm correct. But yeah, so that whole narrative has gone now because people realized after if you were if you invest in a dozen projects in the last cycle, maybe one of those would have actually launched something. So people got a bit sick of hearing these kind of false promises and eventually started to see through it. So now people aren't even bothering with that, and people are just kind of really leaning into the whole uselessness side of this stuff, and just launching meme coins, and those are really the only things that are actually pumping in price.
Yeah, in fairness, I come off as like totally anti-crypto, but it's not a conscious like decision like I hate crypto and I think all crypto is useless. I'm always asking people, and I'll ask you this too, if you can demonstrate one thing that crypto is uniquely good at that's not criminal, then I would change my mind about it. My contention of like saying, God, every time I hear about a crypto project, it's the same thing, is because they all do that. They all get everybody very excited about the initial launch, and then they launch and it doesn't live up to its expectations. But before you can corner them and say, hey, this didn't do what you said, they're pointing to some new shiny thing. Oh, now it's NFTs. Now it's tokenized assets. It's ETFs. It's like the whole industry just runs on lighting some big firework, and then before everything else fizzles out, lighting up another firework and just keeping people distracted. I just wonder, how long do you think this can go on?
Well, so again, I think you're absolutely spot on there. How long do I think you go on? I don't know. Potentially indefinitely. I think people get very, very creative when a lot of money is in view. So people will keep on coming up with it. There will always be a new fad. Like you said, NFTs. I mean, what, do you remember them?
Right.
No one cares about NFTs anymore. Last cycle, that's all they cared about. Now it's meme coins. Next time it'll be something else. I think the ETF stuff is fascinating, and again, I think that's why your documentary is so brilliant, and everything you've said just now is completely spot on because like take the whole narrative around decentralization, right? Even a couple of even until relatively recently, the whole thing about crypto was we're bringing down the banks and it's decentralized peer to peer and that kind of stuff, and then now it's just like people are just begging BlackRock to pump their bags, and BlackRock like take more Bitcoin off the market and put it into the ETF, and people got very excited. I think this week Franklin Templeton made some kind of announcement that they were looking to invest in crypto or whatever. And now, because that all people really care about is just the asset price appreciation, about their bags being pumped. And they're willing to sacrifice on any kind of false notions of decentralization. If that's what it takes to pump their bags. And that's why your picture is quite great as well. That famous meme in crypto. I'm in it for the technology. Actually, no one cares about this technology, I would say. And least of all the people who are actually founding these projects. What I found particularly disenchanting, working in the crypto industry was just just how derisive a lot of the founders are towards their like potential users or whatever. They just they don't care. They just want people to hand over their cash. They don't really care about delivering a product or providing any kind of value at all.
One of my recurring arguments is that I feel in the crypto space there are no good actors, but instead a spectrum of varying degrees of bad actors. I constantly interact with crypto proponents, and a recurring theme I find in their psyche is that they just do not care whether the scheme they've attached themselves to is predatory or Ponzi-like, as long as they can make money. You touch on this when you make reference to an article on one project, Olympus DAO, where a news article states, yes, it's a Ponzi, but who cares? And I guess, do you ever run across people who really were ethical and had empathy, or is it just like a free-for-all of economic Darwinists pretending to be free market capitalists?
I mean, that article there was a disgrace. I mean, that was CoinDesk. And that article is still there, and I think the only reason they haven't taken it down is because when everyone knows that they put that out, and that really never should have seen the light of day. Yeah, I mean it's a Ponzi, but who cares? I mean, people were saying this with Olympus Dow, and that was just wild. I mean, everyone knew it was a Ponzi. You know, all of those rebase
Well,
tokens
Terra Luna too.
are
Terra
exactly
Luna
the
was
same thing.
basically the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're
But I
absolutely
guess
right.
the
It was.
bigger it
I
is, the
think
less likely people are going to spell it out. You know, there's just too much money in it.
re- I think the word Ponzi gets thrown around a lot in this in the space, and I guess it's somewhat pedantic to say, well, actually technically that's not a Ponzi or whatever. I think Terra Luna definitely was definitely was a Ponzi, but rebase tokens and Olympus DAO are just the clearest example of a Ponzi in the space because what happened is they tried to without wanting to go kind of too deep into the technical side of it, they're another kind of form of stable coin, right? So they try to maintain a peg of the dollar, but they do it by increasing the supply. So, for example, if you have a token and it's $1, and then people buy it, and that obviously sends the price up to $2. What a rebase token will do is it'll split the supply. So you don't have one $2 token in your wallet. You then have two $1 tokens.
Mm-hmm.
So the market cap is expanding, but the token price is meant to be stable. Now, what made it a Ponzi is that it that relies on new people to keep coming in, an infinite line of new people to keep
Right.
coming in to fuel these APYs that Olympus Style was offering. And I think at one point they were saying, 8,000% guaranteed APY. Because you'd keep getting, these tokens would keep kind of multiplying in your wallet because of this rebase function. And that APY is only sustainable if more and more people
Mm-hmm.
come in. And then once people stop coming in, then it all collapses. And that's what happened with Olympus DAO. So yeah, I mean they were really egregious Ponzi. And they were shilled very hard by just everyone.
Well,
And
I've got an
yeah,
article on the IORadio site that's been circulating about whether Bitcoin as an investment is a Ponzi. And we go into all the different definitions of what a Ponzi is. And I know there's some contention. People say it can't be a Ponzi if there's not a central bad actor like a Bernie Madoff or a Charles Ponzi. And there has to be fraud and promises. If people want to find out more, you can find this article at ioradio.org. Also, there's another article that I don't know if you've seen. I've created a list of tired or stupid crypto talking points. We've got 29 basic points that kind of address most of the
yeah.
arguments. And that's another thing. I want to, thanks so much for recognizing the documentary. I really feel like it's just slipped between the
Mm,
cracks. We've now been featured at 6 film festivals around the world, from Switzerland to Seattle to France.
yeah,
But I
that's
can't
amazing.
get a single piece of mainstream media or even industry media to give me any attention. And the only thing I'm left with about that is that, unlike all the other stories that are negative about crypto, they're negative about specific crypto projects, right? Whereas my
Mm,
documentary tackles blockchain, the underlying technology, and I think that kind of pulls the rug, to use a
mm.
term they're familiar with, out of the entire industry. If you expose
Yeah,
the base technology as being fraudulent, um, that's that kind of,
yeah.
I don't know what I can do other than just keep it out there and hope more people discover it. But I certainly can't get the attention I think it deserves. But thank you for at least
You,
acknowledging.
oh no, no problem at all. And you know what, Adam? I mean, this is a really big problem. I've had this week as well. I've been working on a story about, I don't, you've probably seen those stats around how many Americans own crypto.
Right.
Um, you know, these surveys commissioned by
Very
Coinbase
misleading.
and uh, just complete nonsense. And some people, like Better Markets, which is a really great kind of public interest organization. They do great analysis, and they kind of work for they do a lot of advocacy work to just improve not just kind of shine a light on crypto malpractice, but just kind of improve markets generally. They've talk a lot about why these surveys are just complete nonsense. And I went out there, and last week I interviewed a statistician about this. He's a fellow of the I think it's called the American Statistical Association. He worked as a statistician for 40 years. He's advised governments and whatever. And I asked him, he very kindly agreed to do this. I asked him to take a look into the methodology of these surveys. And I spoke to him on a call, and just for half an hour, he was just one point
Right.
after the other around why these methodologies are nonsense and these surveys aren't worth the paper they're written on. And the number of Americans actually own crypto is nowhere near what these claims are. Now, Coinbase has been lobbying very, very hard based on
Phony
these,
stats.
on
Yeah.
these surveys. It's achieved huge traction in Washington, and the media has been reporting on this. I've gone to a lot of mainstream media outlets. I've gone to even a lot of crypto outlets and said, look, I've interviewed this highly prominent, highly distinguished statistician, and he's just blown a hole in these surveys. Do you want to write something about this? And the amount of resistance I've come up against to that is just
Yeah.
shocking. So, if you present someone with like some evidence which just blows a hole in this lie, lie that they want to believe, and then you're going to encounter a lot of
I
opposition
guess
because
it's
of that. And
because they're all
equally,
getting
it's
paid. There's advertising as their main source of revenue, and they don't want to dismiss the industry as a whole because that would mess with their thing. But to give people an idea of what we're
yeah,
talking about, because I got into a discussion today on the Reddit community about this. Trump has just announced that he's promoting crypto and Bitcoin, and I think he said like 40% of Americans were using crypto, or 40 million Americans.
that's right. Yeah,
And so that sparked an argument
yeah,
in our community,
that's the
which
Coinbase
is more
stuff.
rational about, by what metric do you determine, because this is all supposed to be anonymous, right? So they're probably just using the
Mm.
number of crypto wallets that exist, which is a very fuzzy data point. When anybody who's really into crypto knows they need tons and tons of wallets to keep all of their crypto from tainting each other.
Mm.
But then Coinbase released one metric that we thought was a little bit more interesting, and maybe you could speak to this. In one of their SEC reports, they refer to
Hmm.
the monthly active users of about 8 million active accounts,
Mm.
which seems a lot different than the 40 million or the 40% of Americans, or what other things people are saying. What's your take on that? What do you really think the figure actually is closer to?
Yeah, so I mean, so first, yeah, so I mean, first of all, yeah, I've seen people using like number of wallets and that kind of stuff to estimate crypto usage. That's complete nonsense. I mean, even now I've got like 30 or 40 different wallets. MetaMask, you can just set up as many as you want, and then you can make them on different chains as well and that kind of stuff. So, obviously there's nothing in them anymore, and they've been active for a long time. But yeah, so that's complete nonsense. What these surveys did, right, was they went out and they interviewed a couple of thousand people, and then they kind of extrapolated
Uh,
figures and whatever. But yeah, the methodology they used was just, yeah, it was just so bad, and they deliberately oversampled by 500 people. They don't make it clear whether that oversample was included in their general population analysis. If it does, it completely invalidates it. And the statistician I interviewed, they really don't explain the methodology at all. And the statistician said, yeah, you should be very circumspect when looking at reports and surveys like this, because I'm paraphrasing him here, but there's an agenda behind it, and these figures really don't
right,
kind of show anything. And they use these kind of opt-in panels, and if you're opting in to do a survey about crypto, the chances are you're likely interested in this
right.
subject anyway. And they don't account for like the digitally excluded. These surveys are all online, so they're really meaningless. Like the Federal Reserve just put out their annual household income survey, and there was a section on crypto in that, and that's again, the statistician was talking about that. This is a really robust survey. They interviewed I think about 12,000 people, so six times as many as the
Well,
Coinbase
also,
survey thereabouts.
on any American that has had to file taxes in the last couple of years, there's a question on your return that says, "Do you hold
Yeah.
any crypto, or have you held any crypto?" So, that's got to be a rather revealing figure. I don't know if that's been made public or not. The number of people that have checked that box one way or another.
Hmm. No, that's fascinating. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so those kind of stats, those kind of reports are far more robust than anything that's been kind of commissioned by an interested
Hmm.
party. But yeah, the Fed survey shows that crypto usage has gone down past 2 years
Hmm.
in a row, and I think they estimate I think it's about 6 or 7% of the US adult population, compared to 20%, which is what the figure that Coinbase is touting. There's 52 million crypto holders in the US. That's not true. It's significantly lower
Right.
than that, according to a far more robust survey by the Fed. But yeah, but again, people are very reluctant to report on that. They've likely already reported on the Coinbase survey, like you said, their advertising revenues like matter to them a lot. So yeah, there's a lot of spurious figures out there, and a lot of reluctance to actually kind of report on
Yeah.
on the truth or accurate data.
I find your book is
But there we
just,
go.
it's just chock full of like scams inside of scams inside of scams. Like there's an interesting story where you talk about FTX's collapse and how they allowed the Bahamian nationals to liquidate their accounts when everybody else's were
No,
frozen,
yeah.
presumably to keep gangs of locals from putting their heads on stakes out in front of the island while they were dealing with their insolvency, which ended up
Yeah.
sparking a secondary market. This is what I hadn't heard of. This sparked a secondary market of people who had Bahamian approval to engage in scams on top of scams. Can you elaborate a bit
Yeah,
on
oh
what
yeah.
happened there?
Yeah, yeah, that was wild. This was one of those stories that kind of got lo this was out there. This is like, in the public domain, but it kind of got lost in the kind of just the melee around the FTX collapse. But I found this fascinating. I was watching this in real time. Is when FTX was collapsing, they still allowed the only when they had halted withdrawals, they were still allowing
From the
withdrawals from
locals,
accounts with
so the locals wouldn't
from
kill them.
Bahamian. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Sam was still on the island, so everyone was saying, well, it's because, yeah, it's because, he doesn't want to get killed by the people who are still there. So what happened was you got a lot of influencers or, kind of whales or big accounts. Sorry, either paying people with Bahamian accounts, because, you could still transfer your balances internally. So they were paying people with these Bahamas KYC accounts to kind of make withdrawals for them. Or what they were doing is they were going to employees at FTX who were, I mean, they were pissed off. They also, a lot of their remuneration was paid in the exchange, whatever. So they were going to employees or former employees and just saying, just here's like a blank piece of paper. Can you set me up with a Bahamas KYC account? And they were paying these employees, and the employees were doing
Ah,
it, for the money. So people were selling, I mean, that's identity fraud.
hmm.
And influencers were bragging about this. One guy, there's one account. He's deleted these posts, but obviously they're still out there. You can still find them. Where he's just like, yeah, I just got 4 million off the exchange by doing this. And he's posting about he's like anyone's any FTX employee able to do this, I'll pay you 200K, that kind of thing. So yeah, this was wild. But then what happened was that a lot of people who had Bahamas accounts, yeah, like you said, there was like a secondary market of scams going on. People, it was like looting during the Blitz, where people with Bahamas accounts were getting the internal balances of people, withdrawing them, and then just not sending to people who had paid them. They just weren't sending them the funds over and just keeping it for themselves. So yeah, it was really wild. Kind of like, subplot to the FTX collapse.
So your book is Crypto Confidential, an insider's account from the front lines of fraud. I searched for it online, and there's another Crypto Confidential book. Are you aware of that?
Yeah,
And it looks like it's
yeah,
called
yeah.
Crypto Confidential: Winning and Losing Millions in the New Frontier of Finance, and this is dated July 9th, 2024. So it hasn't come out yet either. It's what's up with that? Is it somebody trying to kind of steal some of your thunder or what?
No, yeah, that is a book by a different author. So yeah, I'd say to anyone listening to this, just make sure you don't get the two
Right.
confused and have a look at who the author is. Yeah, that's a book with a similar title, which is coming out kind of around the same time. I spoke to the publishers about this, and they were looking in that one looks like it might just be a US only release, whereas my book will be yeah UK, US, and international. So, but I think that's written by some guy. I think he used to be like an influencer or something like that.
Well, I haven't read
But
his,
yeah,
but I can say that yours is it's a very fun read. I think you're a very good writer. It's almost movie like in the way it just chronicles just craziness on top of craziness. So, tell us how you got out and what prompted you to write the book.
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you know, from the moment I kind of entered the industry, I was pretty taken aback by what was going on. My background was like PR. This is the brown envelope journalism paying off journalists. That was quite shocking. But then kind of as you kind of went further and further down the rabbit hole, just the scale, the magnitude, the severity of stuff that was going on got worse. And then obviously Luna and FTX happened. I mean, in the wake of Luna, that's what was really drove things home for me. So I speak about this in the book, looking through the forums. the Terra Luna forums, and there was a list of the admin had pinned a list of suicide prevention helplines to the top of the page, and I was like, oh shit, that this isn't just like people's money. It's not just figures on the screen. Like, this is like people's lives. Behind every headline, there's just life savings lost, and in some cases, tragically, lives lost. And there was a story about a Korean family who had the father had driven his wife and kids into a lake,
Yeah, I read about that.
and then the police were like searching for his stuff later. I think they looked through his hard drive, and he had been Googling like Terra Luna collapse, like how can I recoup my money, that kind of stuff, and then also Googling ways to commit suicide. So just seeing that kind of stuff and realizing that this is people's lives being lost by this fraud, and it's not just numbers in the screen. That's it all became very, very real at that point. And then the same thing happened again with FTX, and I was just like, just the appropriation, billions and billions of dollars of appropriation of client funds. And
Are the people you're
everyone
working
knew
with,
that.
are they still in the industry, or did everybody get out?
Yeah. They're still there. They're still very much in the industry. So yeah, so it was just like seeing that stuff. I was, after the collapse of FTX, I left. Handed my notice in, got out, and then I was just like, people need to. But it wasn't just that, those were the big kind of headline things. It was just, the clients we were working with just had so little respect for their investors. You can see why FTX were appropriating their investor funds. It's an attitude which is prevalent throughout the crypto industry, just treating investors and users, like idiots and just, like cash cows. And our clients were doing that, and we were dealing, with that. I was dealing with that day in, day out. Just this kind of that same attitude. So I got out, and I was like, well, people need to know how this stuff really operates, because there's a lot of lies, like we were saying throughout this call. There's a lot of lies, there's a lot of false narratives out there. Someone needs to, shine a light on how this stuff actually operates. How the projects are run, what the attitude of the founders and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I wrote the book, and yeah, got a great publisher. The History Press, Flint Books. They're really, they really believe in the in this project, and they're really kind of backing this very hard, and they're very keen as well to get this message out there. So yeah, very very
So when is the
appreciative
book going to
of
be
them.
officially out?
22nd of August it
I
launches.
gotcha. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you want to say to people that are into crypto right now, as well as what you would want to say to the people that you worked with that are in the industry, other people that were doing what you do? Is there any message that you want these two groups of people to know?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Brett Johnson. He was a former US most wanted cyber criminal, and now he does a lot of great stuff, kind of spreading awareness and that kind of stuff. And I spoke to him, and he said something interesting, which is that if somebody wants to do something bad or whatever, and they've already made that decision. There's really not much you can do to stop them from doing that. So if somebody wants to have a punt in crypto, trade a token or whatever, and they've made up their mind, there's really not much you can say that's going to prevent them from doing that. I would just say to the people who are thinking about getting involved, on the kind of user side, just be very, very cautious. It's no good saying, to people, don't do it, because who's going to listen to that? But I would say just be cautious. Just, things are not as they seem, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and people really. The people behind a lot of these projects really just kind of are trying to entice people in. So I'll just say, yeah, be cautious and just don't, it's kind of a cliched saying, but just only, kind of speculate with what you're, assume you're going to lose everything,
Well, this
basically.
is kind of a very nice way of saying, I know how the sausage is made. If you decide you want to eat sausage, I guess I'm not going to tell you not not to eat it, but just be careful.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I would. I read your book, and I didn't come away with, well, if you're going to do it, okay. I mean, I came away with, you don't need to be doing any of this stuff. You don't need to be eating that sausage.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I see what's in that sausage. There's nothing in there that's nutritious.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that is the message. I mean, first, I mean, just
So
don't
what
like.
about your
But then
peers,
if you
people
are,
in
just yeah,
the people that are doing what you're doing? I mean, do you have any kind of advice or foreboding warnings for them, or what?
what to like the people I used to
I
work
mean, the
with,
people
like
that
the
are
founders
running
and that
these
kind of stuff.
schemes, they're definitely the ones that you probably can't rational reason with from an ethical standpoint because they've already made up their mind that money is more important than ethics, and they obviously feel that
Yeah,
that whatever risk we think they're taking is worth the rewards that they have their eyes on. So I don't have any aspersions about
yeah, exactly.
trying to convince them that being empathetic is worthwhile. But is there
Yeah.
anything that you can say to them that might make them think, that might key on what their priorities are?
No, no, you're completely right, and no, like you just said, I don't really have anything to say to them. This book, I didn't write this book for them. For a lot of these founders, a lot of the people, still in the industry and who have been in there for a long time, there is really nothing you can say to them. Like you just said, they have made this decision that money is all that matters, and that's, they will do whatever it takes to get money and to enrich themselves, at the expense of others. I really wrote this book for people considering kind of investing in crypto and getting into crypto, so that, like you said, they can see kind of how the sausage is made and then, make an informed decision based on that. But for a lot of these founders, they are, quite incorrigible. And, as I was leaving the industry, I said, it's not even the founders, it's kind of people working at the company as well. I'd say to people who worked at our companies, I said to, spoke to a lot of people, or, people that we were kind of involved with within our network, like, I'm getting out. Like, you should, have you thought about getting out yourself? And no one said, no one else said that they had even kind of considered it. I know some people who subsequently have left, the crypto industry and they've kind of returned to what they were doing before, and people who, I don't know, worked in finance or marketing or whatever. But yeah, at the time, yeah, no one was really that interested in leaving because there was still, even after the collapse of FTX, there's still a lot of money sloshing around. Our businesses, the marketing agents at least, were still doing very well.
And I take it
And
that they all just kind of feel like they're untouchable, that they can't be nailed for fraud, that there's too many of them and not enough law enforcement, or that they're out of the jurisdiction, or they just is that the general feeling? Do you feel like most of these people are going to get away with it?
yeah, it's difficult. I think it's kind of like a case by case, based on how they, some people definitely feel they're untouchable. Some people think that and I really do think that some people don't think that what they did was actually that bad. A lot of people, everyone knew that what they were doing was, sort of fraudulent or whatever. But for a lot of people have the mentality that, well, if anyone's stupid to buy this stuff, then it's their fault. Or, that kind of mentality is very prevalent. Like, well, we didn't, hold a gun to anyone's head and
Did
tell them
engage
to
in
buy
they
our
did
stuff.
engage in
So,
fraud and deception, which is what makes the process illegal.
well, that's the thing. Even though they weren't, forcing someone's hand to click the buttons to buy these tokens, they were deceiving people and giving off false messages and false narratives. So, yeah, I mean, but again, people don't, difficult to get people to kind of be self-reflective or
Right.
self-aware to admit that they've actually
I
done
encounter that a lot in
something
social
wrong.
media, right? People will say we're all going to make it, price is going to go up, it's amazing, and then when the thing crashes, they go, well,
Mm.
everybody knows it's highly risky. I'm like, well, you didn't. That's not what you were saying last month.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And I think some people are. I think increasingly, like some people are kind of worried about legal repercussions. I think there are some probably people out there sweating right now over the things they did. The SEC is really on a just an absolute crusade at the
Mm-hmm.
moment. They're on a warpath, really clamping down on projects and companies. Even they're still going after some of those old ICO
Right.
scams back in 2016, 2017. So I think the amount of litigation that's going to happen is going to increase. A lot of the projects which are operating in 2021, 2022, that whole time. Yeah, I think there's going to be more lawsuits, more litigation
Are
against
you are
them.
you guys are you worried that they might come after what y'all were doing?
Um, No, I don't. Well, I'm not worried about that. I think, I've
I mean, you've
faced
got, you
making
kind of
mistakes in the book
chronicle a
for the
lot
things that
of
I did.
questionable activity in the book. Did you at any point wonder whether or not that would be incriminating?
Um, no, not really. And I've
You
kind
don't
of,
sound super confident.
kind of.
Sorry, I couldn't help.
I
I
don't know.
just
I
wanted to
don't.
make you a little nervous there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I kind of wrote the book as kind of like almost like a kind of mea culpa. A lot of the stuff that we did, it was most of the stuff we did was kind of in a gray area. For at least us directly, I think for the people around us, the projects that we were working with, a lot of their stuff was just kind of cut and dry fraud. But as for us ourselves, yeah, I think it's a bit of a bit of ambiguity there.
That seems to be a recurring thing in the crypto world. Is yeah, we're legit. Those other people, they're the scam. But
Yeah. I mean, this is in the very last bit of the book. I say, I just kind of hope that this book goes some way towards, righting some of the wrongs. And I hope that, I hope it does get widely read. And I hope that it doesn't just kind of get treated as an object of kind of, fascination in the same way that, like the memoir of a disgraced politician,
right.
would just be, interesting or fascinating. And I hope that, it does get treated as a kind of cautionary tale.
I think it does,
Um,
and
and
I
yeah,
think it's really it definitely there's no other publication like this that I'm aware of that really goes into the day to day details of what's happening on the inside of the industry. I do hope a lot of people get a chance to read it because it's very eye opening.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Thanks for that. I mean, I was talking to someone, but again, I think this book is really the first expose written by an insider, by someone who was running projects and someone who was really, up to their neck in the crypto industry. And I was speaking to someone on Twitter about that, and I was just like, yeah, to be honest, I was kind of surprised that more people haven't come forward and written their own books. And then, the person I was speaking to on Twitter just straight away made it very clear that, well, yeah, because they would incriminate themselves by doing so. And that thought never really crossed my mind because I was like, well, this message deserves to, be out there. And it would be fundamentally selfish of me just to kind of like, take the money that that we made or whatever when we were running these projects and then just leave the industry and look never look back and not tell this story even if there are kind of repercussions or whatever because I think that'd be selfish because I think there is a kind of moral obligation to inform others about how this stuff is run. So I mean I hope other people come forward and do the same. But yeah, as it stands, this is the only book
I guess
at the moment.
at this point you haven't been approached by anybody in law enforcement, that as a source that could provide them additional information.
Yeah, well, I have. Yeah, I've had
Because your book's not
quite a few
completely
people
out yet.
actually.
That could be something that could happen. The Justice Department, SEC, CFTC starts knocking on your door, wanting to.
I mean, I probably with this, I can't give too many details, but I have had quite a lot of people actually reach out to me in one form or another about various like whistleblowing programs and that kind of stuff, and yeah, some requests for information there. So yeah, I mean, probably can't speak too much about that at the moment, but yeah, it's that's something I'm looking at. Those kind of official kind of official
So
whistleblowing
your
programs with
coworkers that are
like
still in the industry, do they know about your book?
that is a great question. I haven't really spoken to them since I left, to be honest. I'm not really in contact with them. So I don't know, they might know, they might, I mean, yeah, word might have gotten around or I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
If they do, they haven't said anything.
All right. Well, Jake, thanks so much for coming on the show, and it really was a pleasure talking with you. And I would recommend people check out the book. We have this thing called the ultimate crypto question, and it's very simple. Crypto people talk about technology, the internet, and the light bulb and the combustion engine is changing entire industries, and they claim that crypto can do that, blockchain can do that. So I say, well, for all these other things you compare crypto to, there's a simple question. Name
Mm,
something that it does better than what we're already using. And they can all
yeah.
answer that. So we're 15 years into crypto, and I ask the same question. Name one specific non-criminal thing that blockchain technology is better at than what we're already using.
Yeah.
Do you have an answer to that?
No, I don't. And actually, yeah, I saw this in your in your documentary, and you talk about, the microwave.
Right.
And it's very clear like what the microwave does. And no, I don't have an answer to that. And I would challenge anyone who who says they do. I mean, I was talking to someone on Twitter the other day, and they were like, oh yeah, like blockchain tech is going to improve efficiencies within capital markets, or like no, they said blockchain has improved efficiencies in capital markets. And I just asked a very simple question, well,
Right.
how?
Specific.
And they were like, well, yeah, exactly. I was like, well, what has it done? Like, how has it improved? And they were like, well, actually, there's this protocol coming out which is going to allow instant settlement of FX
Right. Just wait.
transactions. And I was like, well, one, that hasn't happened yet. So that hasn't come out yet. And two, I mean, even if it does what you said, I was like, instant settlements, just because they're instant. I mean, there's a reason why FX markets don't settle instantly at the moment. There's
Right.
lots of reasons why.
Policy
So,
decision. It's not a
you know, if,
technology decision.
yeah, exactly. Like they could, if you think if these, like the London interbank market, if they wanted instant settlements, they wouldn't just go out and make that. I mean, it's not you don't need blockchain
Right.
to do that.
What do you want people to know? Where can they get the book? Do you have a website? Do you have any other places you can direct people that want to find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's available for pre-order at a lot of places. It's on Amazon. So yeah, Crypto Confidential, an insider's account from the Frontlines of fraud. Yeah, Jake Donoghue. If you type that in, it's available. Yeah, Amazon, different bookshops, bookshop.org, like WH Smith, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's available for pre-order now. Print and the ebook is also available for pre-order, and it's going to be an audiobook as well, but they're still recording that at the moment. So yeah, if people can pre-order, that'd be great, and then it gets released on the 22nd of
All
August.
right. Well, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's really, really a fun read too.
Adam, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, the pleasure was all mine.
Well, there you go. Another episode done. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and supporting our channel and everything. If you'd like to find out more about us, our main website is IORadio.org. You can also catch us on YouTube at YouTube/American Scream Video. That's where you'll find these podcasts with additional AV added, as well as the documentary Blockchain Innovation or Illusion, which I recommend everybody watch. We're available on all the major podcast streaming platforms, so be sure to look for IORadio. And until next time, I want to personally thank everybody for tuning in and your support.